The content of this podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered medical advice. Always consult with a qualified healthcare professional for any health concerns. Take care of yourself out there.
Welcome to Unraveling. This is a podcast that sees the world through the lens of mental health. I'm Mary Wilson, a journalist.
And I'm Kurt White, a social worker and psychotherapist.
Well, Kurt, last episode, we had a really interesting discussion about artificial intelligence and its effect in mental health. But of course, there's much more out there on the internet. And we wanted to look into how the web might be playing a role in our self-perception, maybe how we shape and are shaped by those online spaces that we inhabit.
Yeah, and then we have a real special collaboration this time, actually with another podcast called Never Post.
Yeah, Never Post is a really interesting podcast that is all about the internet, what it does to us, and we'll be joining them in a conversation about self-perception and the internet.
Yeah, their host, Mike Rugnetta, has been a real internet all-star, I guess, for a long time. He's done a number of things. He's won awards. He's hosted this podcast and produced all kinds of interesting things. And we have our producers in common. That's sort of one of the points of connection here, is that they've been in sort of dialogue with each other about these two podcasts. And then we begun to talk about the overlapping interests of mental health and the way that we show up in the world and the way that we show up online. And how are these things related? Are they the same or different? How could we explore that?
And so things are going to sound a little bit different today. We're going to jump right into a conversation between Mike and Kurt, who are talking about all things internet and self-perception.
Yeah, I was really excited that Mike came in with questions for me. It was really fun to be on that side of it and to be thinking about this with my psychotherapy hat on in ways that I really hadn't before. He really inspired a lot from me, and I hope maybe me from him.
Mike Rugnetta, by the way, knows his way around the internet. He's a writer, host, producer, and sound designer who's been working in digital media since 2007. He's the former host, writer, researcher, and co-creator of the 5-time Webby Award-winning YouTube series Idea Channel. And he got his start as a member of the original cast of the Know Your Meme web series produced by Rocket Boom. Let's take a listen.
So, Kurt, I'm curious if you are familiar with this thing that people say online. I have seen it mostly on TikTok and Instagram, though I'm sure it happens in other places. And it goes something like this. It's usually a comment that people leave under a video, and it says, "I built this algorithm brick by brick," or "I placed this brick myself," or things along those lines.
No, I don't know about that. What does that mean?
Do you want to take a guess as to what it might mean?
I have heard that people have a certain pride sometimes in the idea that the algorithm really gets them, that they're careful about the things that they like or even linger on, I think, right? So that they're only getting that sort of special, unique content to them. Is that what that would mean?
You absolutely nailed it. Yeah, it's a way of describing the work that you put in to, I think some people would say the word like training the algorithm on social media, right? Usually TikTok or Instagram, to show you really specific things. And often it's like weird stuff. You see these comments underneath things most popularly on stuff that's like, feels like it's off the beaten path. But I think it sort of indicates this larger sense that like people do feel like their algorithm reflects their preferences and that there is labor that they can put into the way that they use social media to, almost build a edifice, build a thing that they can live with inside.
It's kind of interesting, isn't it? Because it's partly we have this public-private distinction, there's sort of the self we show to others and the self that's true of us inside, and what is that point of overlap? How separate is it? The rest. And this is kind of interesting because it's partly public and performative, but it seems to me it partly also some of the genuine joy people might get out of that might be the idea that it is also true of them. There is a sort of a feeling seen that they get, feeling seen by the algorithm, as weird as that might sound.
Yeah, it is a little bit of a crossing the line between the two. And I know that I've seen this maybe 3 times. So it's not something that happens often, but it's someone who has uploaded a video that they have taken on their phone of someone else's phone, usually their significant other, scrolling through their TikTok For You page, just to show how different and how strange it is. And that does feel a little exposing, vulnerable, maybe. Or at least that's usually the way in which I've seen that sort of thing shared, where it's like, you're opening a door and you're like, check out what's back here. Whoa. So I've been thinking about this a lot, this like brick by brick idea, alongside, I think, another much larger and more abstract idea, which is that in the process of being online, and I don't necessarily think that it's active, I think it can just be something that happens, though it is, for some people, very active. A lot of us figure out, like you said, who we are, or we figure out like who we could be, like what the options are. It's not too dissimilar from just being out in the world normally, but the internet kind of provides, kind of necessarily, like more perspective, more options. It depicts more things in a concentrated kind of way. And the comparison that I make to myself a lot when I'm thinking about this is that the internet now is kind of like what the mall was when I was a kid, which is like a place that you can go and you can see lots of different people all at once. And you can kind of get a sense of what your options are to even like what kind of person you can even be, and to like get a sense of like what you might imagine yourself as at some point.
Mm-hmm.
And I think maybe there's this thing that's happening, especially in the algorithmic internet, which like isn't all of the internet, of course, but is, I think, a lot of the parts we talk the most about, where people are going to the internet to see who and what and how it's possible to be or to be like, and to make some versions of themselves, while at the same time making, through their interests and actions and engagements, their own version of these places. So like, building this thing brick by brick, while we also, in a sense, are built brick by brick by it. So it's this strange, like funny recursive loop of like making a feed that influences our sense of self, which is then reflected in the feed, which then influences our sense of self, which then is reflected in the feed.
I mean, I'm newer to the algorithmic internet than a lot of people. I think just some of that is just generationally and the kinds of things I've been drawn to. I have come to kind of enjoy parts of that, though. I will say more than like I thought I would, but I do feel a bit stranger in a strange land about it sometimes. It's still a bit of a culture shock to that. And I think I have lower expectations of that just from the generation I'm in and the experience that I've had than some people that I've been around.
What is it that's shocking to you?
At the speed of it, for one.
Sure.
I think the first time I opened TikTok, I thought I was having a stroke. I couldn't, it was like I got on a ride that I wouldn't stop. And and it was just throwing this at me, throwing that at me. And I'm like, oh my God. Like,
I want to say
know.
After umpteen hours of use, that feeling goes away. It does not. It never.
That doesn't, no, that's right.
It doesn't get any better.
That's right. I found the Instagram version a little more tolerable for myself, but I know that's like an old guy thing to say. But here we are nonetheless. But I think also it's taken a lot of mental effort to try to figure out what I think people are doing, even when they're posting something. There are obviously people trying to sell you something or do something like that, but like a lot of it is not that, or not exactly that, or not just that. And I think, that's the other shocking part, is that like it is so much more public than I've ever wanted to be. I mean, a reaction I've had going all the way back to Facebook and things like that. I'm like, there are a lot of things that I want 2 or 3 or 5 people to know about what I'm up to. There's almost nothing I'm doing that I want 100 people to know about that I'm up to, right? That is personal to me, that is not part of a public persona. And so there is this kind of feeling of like, oh, the people are organizing their public selves in a way that is totally different than the way that I was sort of shown to do that. And I don't know that I've ever really accommodated it inside of myself.
And I think sometimes you see on TikTok that people, when they are forced to accommodate it in a way, they make a video for their 100 or whatever followers, and then it gets picked up by the algorithm and shown to millions and millions of millions. Like, it feels, I think for some people it's exciting, and for some people it's a little terrifying. And I think that, it's like being yourself in public is in that level of public, right? It's like the mall times 10,000 is a very scary prospect. But then also, right, the other side of this is that you're then showing that many people that it is possible to be that kind of person, which, is like a very ambivalent sort of thing. I imagine sometimes that's really, really good and really empowering for any number of people. And sometimes that's whatever the opposite of that is.
Yeah. And it does get into this idea, but what are we talking about the self? Like, is it the aspirational self? Is it the sort of the public version that we want people to reflect back to us? We want to put it out there so that we see the sparkle in someone else's eye when they see that version of us, which is, by the way, a developmental need, right? That's a sort of like a way that we develop the like really internal psychological sense of self, is that you get admired for being you, ideally, right? And then there's another part, you get joined and know that you're not alone in things, right? And that other people then believe in your capacities, even though you haven't demonstrated them yet, right? These are child needs that are never fully met, that we sort of have as developmental processes and then take into our adult selves as kind of compromise formations, Yeah. And I see a lot of that like in this kind of public sphere of it, I think, that like, how are we hoping to be seen, admired, joined, believed in? I think the tricky part is that I'm never quite sure how authentic is the output, which always limits what they can take in. Are they going to get this need met? It feels to me sometimes like a real desperate effort to get a need met that is bound to be a bit unsuccessful if it doesn't have the sort of requisite authenticity and vulnerability.
I wonder about the other side of that too, which is like, as an audience member, in what moments and how often and how strongly does it feel like, TikTok, for instance, is like somehow really seeing who I am and confirming, in a way, things that I feel about myself. Like, I might log on and I might start scrolling and I might be like, oh, TikTok thinks I'm a dad today. Or I might log on and I might start scrolling and be like, oh, TikTok thinks that I'm politically very engaged me today. Mm-hmm. And like, sometimes it's true. And sometimes I feel like, like I needed this. This was cathartic. And kind of almost maybe this is selfish, but like, regardless of what the people who are posting might be getting or not getting, I feel to a certain degree like I'm confirming something about myself through the fact that the technology is like, hey, you're going to like this. Mm-hmm. You're into this kind of thing. And then I look at my phone and I think, oh, you're right, I do. Good job. Like, that is how I see myself.
Yeah. Well, and it's sometimes at such an absurd level of specificity. Like, when it gets you, sometimes it really gets you, in a way that is like, I wouldn't have expected any human to know that I would be interested in the way that a particular vowel sound has changed from the world of Proto-Indo-European speakers
I've seen
to
those
the
videos.
Modern English.
They're incredible. Those videos are incredible. Yeah.
They're so good, aren't they? They're so good. But look, I don't think I ever said that to anybody, except maybe a couple people at the University of Chicago that studied that sort of nonsense like 25 years ago. But like, how did it know that about me, And how did it know not to stop giving me videos of children dropping F-bombs in Scottish accents, Like, it's so specific that there almost does feel like there's a little magic about it. You do get a quality of that mirroring quality, I think, sometimes.
Yeah, but it's also funny that, like, that thing, when that happens, feels so different from this brick by brick idea. It's like, instead of placing things, the algorithm is like, you're in this room now. Here you go. Hang out in this room for a little while.
Yeah.
And like, sometimes you have the exact response that you had, which is like, oh, like I like this room. This is I didn't know that this room was in this house.
Yeah.
And I would like to spend some time in here. And then, yeah, sometimes you're like Instagram started showing me videos about the Bible and about Jesus.
Oh, yeah. It thought I was really religious for a little while, too. Yeah.
And I was like, are you trying? Like, and it's a little bit of a hall of mirrors feeling, because I'm like, is there something else about me that I think this, like I'm searching for this? Or are you just trying something just to see what happens?
Mm-hmm.
We ascribe a lot of agency to this technology, and we say it knows and it puts you places and it has figured something out, and it's just doing complicated math. And every once in a while it's not imagining a version of me. It's running an algorithm that will sort of never be able to know or understand.
The sort of way it's evaluating how it works is probably very simple, actually. Just do you stay doing it? How much do you do it?
Yeah.
And so it isn't necessarily even optimized. I mean, not only is there no mind there, but it's not even necessarily optimized to give us the thing that we'd like the most. It's just optimized to give us the thing that we don't stop doing. People often conflate pleasure and sort of reward. And actually, they're like related things neurobiologically, but they're not exactly the same, right?
Wait, can you say more about that, just as it relates to like the feed?
Yeah, sure. I mean, a lot of this stuff, I studied and worked with folks with substance use disorders and addictions for a long time. And I really think an essential way of understanding that is to understand that there's a set of brain circuits that developed with a common ancestor that is so far back in the evolutionary tree that we share this set of circuits in common with as distantly related creatures as things like lizards, right?
Sure.
Like it's way before the mammalian branching and things like this. And this was a set of circuits to sort of get like a lizard can't do meal planning, right? I mean, it's very poor at that, in a 5-year plan, absolutely nothing, right? I mean,
Sure.
Really low
Lizards not thinking about baking a bunch of chicken breasts for the week,
No,
and then
exactly right.
Yeah, their credit report. Yeah.
But so you have to develop a system that has nothing to do with conscious thought, that involves getting them to eat the right nutrients in the right proportions and kind of do most everything else that it does. It has to reward the things at a basic biological level. And that works so well, as an adaptation to the environment, over millions and millions of years, that, it's still kind of like the basic system that most creatures use today. But there are hacks to this, as sort of really how it is. It's an unfortunate chemical accident that some substances, sometimes just naturally occurring, and sometimes if you refine the heck out of them, they sort of tell the brain that the reward part of it is super important when they take that in, right? Cocaine, oh, yeah, it's sort of like you might feel good, the pleasure part, it's sort of a related circuit in the dopamine, but then you take in cocaine and it also, your brain says in a very particular way, I'm pretty sure this is 1,000 times more important for me to do than anything I've ever done before. Yeah. I'm pretty certain I need to do this again. Right.
I've checked the math. I've looked at the numbers.
I've checked the math. I've had this system a long time.
Yeah.
And I don't know how I didn't know about this, but I've got to reorient what I'm doing. I kind of don't care about any of that other stuff anymore. But drugs is not the only way to overwhelm the circuit, actually. You can do it through clever manipulations of people that sort of get your brain to produce its own chemicals that get you into basically compulsive action, right? Gambling is the sort of classic one, of course, right? But if you kind of look at what we've done with a lot of this kind of social media, algorithmically based social media, it's people who know this and have consciously tried to optimize the algorithm to get as much of that dopamine to release, to get you sort of compulsively behaving in that way, to not put the thing down, or to pick it up again as soon as it's down. Put it down, pick it up, put it down, pick it up. They don't care if you like it. They don't care if you like it, right? If you do, great, right? I mean, it's like you like cocaine the first time you try it, the 1,000th time you try it, there may not really be much pleasure in it anymore, but your brain still thinks you need it.
I mean, it's amazing the number of sort of systems I have in my life to remind myself when I have spent too much time online that it's like you could be hurting yourself right now. Like this it feels like maybe you're having a good time, but like, let's check in with the body and the brain and see, I talk to myself the way that I talk to my daughter, like, how are you feeling? Or should we take a moment?
And it requires effort. I mean, isn't that wild? Like, I mean, that's one of the hallmarks of recognizing when you're in a compulsive process, right? Like if you say, even if you're not using excessively, like if you say to yourself, when I go out tonight, I'm only going to have 3 drinks, right? Now you're having to put thought into controlling it. You don't say to yourself, I'm going to wake up tomorrow, I'm going to have only 2 glasses of orange juice. You don't have to do it, right? Orange juice isn't that rewarding. It's just not. And so, you just drink the orange juice you drink. You don't have to think about it, right? And so even the effort to control the use suggests how out of control we are, right?
Yeah. So how does this construction of self, or even the feeling of you are constructing yourself through these actions, like how does that relate? I imagine it's probably different for different people, but is it like we have these compulsive actions and we want to justify doing them because we're like, oh, but this is who I am? Or are those feelings just making us feel like this is who we are because in some way they're positive and we associate sort of constructing the self with a positive affect?
Well, man, I kind of know you were going to get my dark read on this. I don't know if you're going to like my answer to this, but the darkest read of this, which I think is plausible, by the way, is that all of that is a made-up after-the-fact justification, but on a part of the brain that is just simply doesn't like that it didn't know what it was doing. There's a part of your brain that wanted what it wanted to pick up the phone, wanted to not set it down, wanted to do this, and it did it, and now you sort of say to yourself, why did I do that? And the brain doesn't really like that. We sometimes call that confabulation. The brain doesn't like a big hole in its set of schemas, but that sort of compulsive part of the brain can connect directly to the motor cortex. It can get you in motion. It can get you doing things without being processed through sort of higher order cognitive functioning, even things just as simple as like intention and values and things like that. And so you might say to yourself, I like this because I think it reflects who I am. And maybe that's actually total BS. Like it's a lie your brain is telling yourself. That's the darkest read.
Okay.
But I do think there's a slightly less dark way of looking at it. And I think it's along the lines of what you were talking about. Like the world can be broad and narrow. And I think the great joy for me in discovering the internet in 1991 was this sort of idea that the world that I knew in the suburbs of Metro Detroit was no longer the limiting factor in the people I could hang around, the kind of conversations I could have with people, the things that I was interested in, the games that I had this love of this Japanese game, Go. Yeah, it's actually a Chinese game, Weiqi. And I found that I could play it on servers in the middle of the night with people from all over the world, which mostly just crashed at that time. But it became like the most important thing in my life for a couple of years, like doing that. And there was a real solace to it, And I do think that like if I hadn't had that, if I hadn't been able to find something, that community, that group, that sense of self, that even if it's playful and exploratory, I probably would have been more depressed than I was as a teenager. I think that's true.
So in the middle of all of this, right, this like, you have access to this information, these communities that really lets you expand your idea of what's possible, both in the world and for yourself. There's all different kinds of things that you can learn about yourself, about the world, an infinite number of ways that you can go. And I'm curious about one particular, very narrow, though maybe you'll tell me it's very broad, aspect of that, which is something that I see increasingly on TikTok especially, and that is diagnoses. Seeing videos on TikTok commenting in this brick by brick sort of fashion, like somewhere between I've worked hard to get this algorithm, but also the algorithm knows some things about me that maybe I don't. And then at the end of that is, has the algorithm given me this video because I have ADHD? And then people being served videos by therapists or psychologists or whoever who aren't diagnosing people online, but who are, talking about symptoms and then, going to the comments and being like, well, that seals it. That's gotta be me. And I'm curious about your perspective about this kind of thing, that like figuring out this part of yourself using the internet, I imagine it's extremely complicated.
Yeah, it's almost hard to approach it even. I mean, because it's like it opens up the kind of meta question about like what is the role of a diagnosis in self and identity, and then how is the internet feeding that to us, and is it accurate? Is it useful? Does it relate to that? Is it a different thing? It's really complicated. And I think diagnosis, is a complicated thing for folks, actually. Like if you have children, you probably don't want them to have diagnoses. I mean, generally speaking, it's not a good thing, right? You'd think of it that way. It's more not good than good, right? You'd hope, I wish for easy passage for myself, for my loved ones. I would wish for and then diagnosis presumes, illness, and then there's treatment, and then there's effort, and then there's money spent on that, and then there's time, and then there's, and there's all kinds of things about that maybe actually feel quite not so good, conflicted, maybe aversive in that way. But then there is a sort of the other side of that is that like, well, what if I'm already feeling like I'm a person that doesn't fit in this way? That like if there is a sort of some sort of normative pathway, I'm not on it, and I know that I'm not on it. And I suffer in these ways, and I'm alone in that suffering. And I don't know why. I maybe don't even have a word for that. I maybe don't even talk about it. Maybe no one even talks about it to me, but I feel it, and I'm feeling a real thing. And sometimes I think that kind of, whatever that feeling is, that kind of like mismatch with the world, I think sometimes that can lead to the kind of feeling that a diagnosis might actually do me some good. It might help me to know that I make sense in some way, and I'm not alone in that, and that there are other people that have that I can commiserate with or see reflected back to me.
And I imagine also the idea that like there's something that can be done about this, or there's the start of something that can be done.
Exactly, yeah. And sometimes that's true. I mean, it really is true. I mean, I think like, ADHD was probably like wildly underdiagnosed, for a long time. And you think, what did people who have that do? The answer might not be very nice, actually. They might have, not made it through school. They might have not found themselves into jobs and relationships and even hobbies and communities that would have really made them happy and feel satisfied in life. And that sometimes a little bit of treatment goes a long way. Therapy, sometimes medicines, different kinds of things. And so I don't want to totally poo-poo that. Like I do believe in the goals of mental health treatment. There are those that don't, but I do. But there can be a baggage in that too. If you take the label, either from a professional or you give it to yourself, then. But now you have to deal with that. You have to deal with, I'm seeing myself through the lens of this label that I didn't make for myself. Someone else made for me, actually, right? Someone else got to decide what the normative pathway was, and someone else got to decide that I wasn't on it, and someone else got to decide that I belong to this version of the thing that isn't the ideal one, And I think it can give both strength, but also I think there's a kind of baggage built along with it also.
I'm curious, has this process of, a $10 million word that I feel like we used to say a lot online and in media was disintermediation, right? Mm-hmm. We were disintegrating how intermediated all of our experiences of the world were. People through the internet are getting closer and closer and closer to the actual information that they need to live their lives. They don't have to go through gatekeepers. They don't have to go through publishers. They can just go online and learn things. So there's a certain way that you can imagine that there's like a disintermediated way of one constructs oneself now that there's really fine-grained, detailed, voluminous access to information about how the self could actually be and what the possibilities are. And I'm curious if that, that sort of generally, and also like the feed and the algorithmic internet specifically, like, has that impacted your profession?
Oh, yeah. I mean, absolutely. Tremendously so. I mean, Can I give you a weird answer to it that backs way up a bit?
Absolutely.
I think before you get to sort of disintermediation, I think one has to see, I think, the history of psychiatry and mental health treatment through the lens of its relationship, its complicated, ambivalent relationship with science and medicine, and with the constructs of science and medicine as increasingly the unquestioned sources of truth and reality for us, right? This was not always true. We didn't always think this way. This is a historical, cultural way of seeing science and medicine. They had to fight for that. And psychiatry has always been a little bit on the outs of that, and to some extent the other professions. But in a way, they're the ones with the most institutional power, psychiatry is. Freud, for example, was really kind of more of a humanist. He was actually excluded from studying neurology because of anti-Semitism, and so had to sort of invent psychoanalysis as a way of understanding what people are. And there are ways that his approach was scientific in a sense, and in other ways not so. But he used these sort of beautiful terms like soul, psyche, that just would have conjured that. And having those associations more to sort of classical literature and experiences and this, the it, the I, and the beyond the I, right? This is poetry in a way, isn't it? And that kind of played in Europe. But he said, when we translate this into English, you've got to think about the Americans. And the Americans are not going to buy this. They're not going to take that seriously. And so I want you to use the Latin words for these things, because that's what they use in science. They use the Latin words. And they'll buy that, So we have ego and id and superego, right? And the rest. And so sort of ideas that were sort of fundamental to the way that mental health treatment developed in America, and the psychoanalytic version of that in particular, had to do with this sort of wishing to be more a part of the structure of knowledge power dynamics that come from medicine and science. Medicine, however, never really wanted psychiatry. It's always this sort of low guy on the totem pole. And so I think there's been this struggle to be taken seriously as a profession, and the sort of wish to have diagnoses that, by the way, we have almost no lab tests for, right? It's diagnosis by checklist, basically, it's symptoms, and it's a serious business. I'm not trying to poo-poo it, but it's different than I think the way you often get diagnosed with a lot of things in medicine. The rest of medicine, I guess I should say. And so I think that, finally, maybe it gets to a point where people are sort of saying, oh, okay, it's a medical thing. It's like that. I can take it seriously. I can have a medicine. I can have a diagnosis. And then almost right at that moment, on comes the internet, like a damn freight train, and it's here we are. We don't need to, we can just have a YouTube video about it, And maybe it's the internal chaos agent in me where I'm bring it on. That's great. You figure you out, man. That's okay. These categories, whatever, I really don't feel as a representative of the field that I personally don't really want to feel gatekeepy about it, because, which isn't to say I don't believe in the construct validity of diagnoses. I do, actually, a lot of the time, at least. But I don't really believe that science and medicine and psychiatry or anyone else gets to fundamentally decide how you divide those things up, how you divide those categories up. And what I see in the internet, even in the sort of weird versions of it that come out, is this beautiful interstitial, intermediary play space version of things where people can toss around different ideas of the self, and they can be true for a minute and not true for not even a minute, 10 seconds. It can be true for 10 seconds. And then you're on to Scottish kids swearing, you know?
You almost took the next question I had out of my mouth, which is do you worry about people overcommitting to things that this is very loaded, think they've learned about themselves online? It sounds like the answer to that is no.
I don't really worry too much about it.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people, probably if you were to study this, you'd find the most common thing is that people kind of toss it around in their mind for a while and think about it, and maybe it gives them a different sense of their self. Maybe they talk to a couple of people about it, but they don't they're not going to go schedule an appointment and get a prescription for something or go see therapists. But probably far more people don't do that than do that. But the experience of it might really mean something to that group too, right? It may have done something meaningful to them in opening up the sort of window of possibilities of the self just a little bit for them in a way that, like, I think we could be in danger of underestimating the impact of that sometimes. And if some people do, they go, like, geez, like, sometimes it's not subtle. You know what I mean? It's sort of like, yeah, I don't know. Like, I'm seeing people here talking about, I discovered that this is why I have no friends. And this is why I've never turned a paper in on time, ever. And I've gotten fired from 3 jobs because of this. And I'm late constantly. And I'm in trouble for that. And these are real areas of suffering. And you go like, oh my God, I thought I was just a screw up, And they see that. They say, no, I went and I saw someone and I have this trouble now. But I'm getting help for it. And I'm not like that anymore. Look, I'm in a relationship. I have a job. It's better for me. And if that person calls the phone and picks up someone and says, I don't know. Do I have that? I don't know. Like, great. And if you don't have it, what's the harm? Really, what's the harm? They're just labels. We shouldn't be so precious about it.
It makes me think about all of the discussion that has happened around, this is like related but different, I think, therapy speak online, which is like, it is, I imagine for some people, very important to have learned the concept of gaslighting. That like with a name now associated with a specific action, they can now recognize it and see it when it happens to themselves. But then it is also something that people use more conversationally in this fleeting kind of way where they kind of mean lying or, someone who isn't always truthful or has a bad memory. And it's hard to draw a conclusion about therapy speak, quote unquote, as a whole from this like massive broad use of all of these terms, gaslighting, trauma, abuse, right? All of these things that have these really polysemous, like really varied uses depending upon who you're talking to.
It is, and I want to say 2 things about that. One is just I love the term gaslighting, and I love it for reasons you might not expect.
Okay.
I love it partly because it actually comes from a movie. It's like a psychiatry claimed it, at a certain point, but actually, like it's. I sometimes say to people, if you really want to understand motivation better, if you really want to understand the human condition better, you really want to understand the soul better, don't read theory about psychoanalysis or something. Don't turn to psychiatry. Read a novel.
Go watch a movie.
Go watch a movie. They're the ones trying to figure this is why we had poets, we still have, but it's why we need to have them. They're doing the serious work of trying to understand the soul. And I think it's not an accident that it comes out of that world, and that it had a resonance, and that in the last 10 years or so, it started to have a resonance both online, but also much more within the field. This was not like a thing that was talked about my whole career. It's kind of the terms come up in the field too, like this. We don't even know where they come from. But to mean the undermining of one's accurate perception of reality, and I think like. If you're a person that like hears that term and goes, oh no, pay attention to that. Oh no. What was that about? What did you know about that in hearing that you didn't even know that you knew, right? You just needed someone to say those words to you. And all of a sudden the scales begin to fall. A truth begins to emerge, right? I'm much more interested in that than the idea that like, is it accurately used? Do we always mean the same thing by it? Can it be used as a weapon to bludgeon someone with it and to win an argument or something? Or, sure. But so what? So what? If there's a truth in it for some people, play around with it.
It's a perspective about this kind of thing that you just never, ever hear online. And it's, I will say, extremely refreshing to hear a professional say, so what?
Yeah,
so what? Because I think, I'm going to try to string some things together to try to, like, explain how it is that I think I feel or what my reflexive feelings are, which I think reflects how a lot of other people feel. That, like, in a lot of ways, there are strange, very surface level similarities between TikTok and therapy. They are often scheduled, ritualistic, dialogic mediums where you are given an opportunity to think about and maybe construct who you are. It's just that I think we have a hard time balancing the seriousness with which we take individual instances of both of those practices, and that the wires can get crossed within them sometimes. And that even for myself, I go to therapy, like I will leave a session, I'll have some ideas, and then a couple days later, I'll be like, I took that way more seriously than I should have. Yeah. Or I didn't take that seriously enough. And I don't have, for whatever reason, the same thought about the internet. I'm sort of always taking it, I think, slightly too seriously.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. Well, you know, with the therapist, you can be in relationship with them. And so if the therapist says something to you that you don't know until later, it causes a feeling, or it doesn't land the right way, or you start to find yourself in dialogue with the therapist in between sessions and, in your head. Yeah. You can show up again the next week and talk to them about it and say, like, hey, you said this and I didn't like it. And I don't know if it's true or not, but I didn't like it. And then you can explore it through the relational context of therapy. I'll just put it that way. Yeah. But the internet is not a person, actually. And so one cannot do that to the internet. You can try, you can put comments in the chat, you can try, but it's not like the same thing exactly, And so I think it is probably like harder to get out of our head in a way. I think that's exactly what it is. Yeah. I've referred to this idea, like if you really want to talk about self, and self, how that develops, like, I've used this word play a couple of times, not accidentally exactly, because I think you could say fundamentally that the self develops through play relationships in a developmental way, right? Of sort of like you come out of the womb in a symbiotic way. You're not really exactly a person, but you develop being a person. You're a person in the sort of usual legal sense of things. I'm not trying to say that, but like you don't really have an identity yet. And you develop that in relationship to others and in relationship to the parts of you that are only for you. And you do that by trying it on, moving in and out of letting things be true and not true at the same time. That's what play is really, right? It's true and it's not true. And you do that over time. And then that's we think, the sort of psychological basis for development of creativity, actually. That this kind of play structure never goes away. We just learn to do more with it, and we learn more about ourselves in doing that, which is more of a process than a result, right? The self as development rather than the self as a sort of an entity that way. I built the self, and now it's built. I built the self. That's right. And that's the part that's wrong about that, is it's not built. It's that you built a prison for yourself. Any rigid idea about yourself is a prison. If we don't have playfulness about things, then we're going to start suffering eventually, maybe not immediately. And there might be some times where we really need to have that rigidity. It's a protective function. But if we can't get it back, then we're in real trouble. And I think like the internet can be like a seed of that. It can sort of like, I'm not alone. Here's an idea. But you need the relational part of it to metabolize it. Yeah. Kurt, that's so good. It's making me a little emotional. I'm glad. Yeah. I see it in your eyes. Yeah. I think the thing that's really beautiful about that is that there's a hopefulness to it, that especially in this moment, like right now, this week on the internet is very absent. And it feels agentive in a way that I think a lot of people don't at the moment. People feel really controlled. People feel really hemmed in, and people are really trying to search for how it is to be themselves. Some people feeling, I think, like doing that is dangerous. And so knowing that there's this way to think about this, which is just look out for you and just pay attention, is I think really empowering. Well, I think even the dark moments in life are things that we can bring some of that quality of openness to, if we find the right way to do it. I think, with some people, with some community, I think you might find even that sometimes even things like despair, you can have a little bit of playfulness that creates a room around despair, where all of a sudden possibility opens up again where there was none for a minute. And I think that's the task of being human, quite frankly.
Even online.
Especially online. Why not? Why not? Bring it on, man. Bring it on. Online is just bad in the way that we're bad, and it's good in the ways that we're good. And if we can find ways to use it to open us up, then let's rejoice in that. Let's rejoice in that. If it's bad, then let's work together to put it down when we need to. That's important too.
Wow, that was such a powerful conversation and got me thinking about my own social media habits. I'm a user of Instagram, and my algorithm is all about new motherhood and taking care of babies because that's the stage of life I'm in right now. And I definitely resonated with the optimism you had, Kurt, of finding connection and saying, oh, I'm not the only one whose baby's crying 24/7 and won't sleep. And I have all these questions, and there's other people out there with those questions too. But I like how you guys also said know when to put it down, because there's also the world of self-comparison and saying, oh, how does this person have it all together and everything's clean and perfect and my house is a mess? It was a really interesting conversation, Kurt.
I'm so glad you enjoyed it. I really loved listening to it again too. I've got to tell you, it gives me a lot to think about. As a group therapist, I think the needs that we have from groups of all kinds are very powerful. The wish to belong to something, the wish to have parts of ourselves validated, and to know that we're not alone. Just like you said, these are very powerful things.
And if you want to hear more and learn more about the internet and the ways that it shapes us, you can head over to Neverpost.
Yeah, I really hope people do. It's a great podcast. It is just incredibly well made and produced with some really interesting segments. I listen all of the time, and I get really something from it. I think our audience would really like it a lot.
And you can find Neverpost at neverpo.st or wherever you're listening to this podcast episode. And be sure to join us next time for another episode of Unraveling.
Unraveling is brought to you by Brattleboro Retreat. Our producers at Charts and Leisure are Andrew Atkin, Hans Butow, and Jason Oberholzer.
And you can find us on social media by searching Brattleboro Retreat. Brattleboro Retreat is committed to exploring diverse perspectives on mental health. While we invite hosts and guests to share their insights, the views expressed are their own and do not necessarily reflect the policies or positions of the hospital or its staff.